Hello folks, so I think we should have a quick chat today about which Lagna to use. It's an issue that comes up a lot. It's not just a dilemma affecting beginner astrologers, but also seasoned astrologers. And it's a question that comes up often, which Lagna or which ascendant to use and give more importance to. In other words, where to read the chart from. What house should we make the focal point of the chart? Now, of course, there's a rising sign, which is obvious, which is the Lagna, the ascendant. And of course, we always hear about the moon sign or the sun sign, right? It's a bit more complicated than that. And it doesn't have a simple answer. So let me go through the options that we can look at, yeah? So let's get into this. Now, a common way to approach this is with the following question. Which Lagna is more specific? For example, the basic Lagna in the D1 chart changes every 2 or 3 hours, generally. And it's much more specific than the moon sign, which changes every 2 or 3 days on average, which of course in turn is more specific than the sun sign, which changes only once every month. But I want to go a few steps beyond that. Consider the following logic for picking a focal reference point, a focal sign in your chart for analysis, and then reading the chart from there as the new ascendant. First question always to ask is, which Lagna is more specific? And that's how we normally approach the reading, right? Second question to ask is, which sign has an overlap of multiple Lagnas? For instance, if the moon as well as the sun are sitting in a certain sign in your chart, then this becomes a focal point, because that's where the energy is going. The third question to ask is, which sign has the most representation? In other words, the most amount of planets in it or aspecting it. Fourth question, which sign is the strongest? So how do you tell this? Well, signs with strong lords and those with more natural benefics sitting or aspecting it are stronger. This may change the perspective entirely, and you may end up reading the chart from a point that is not obvious, but is clearly showing better results. Yeah. When you look back on the events of your life. So in general, this is kind of something that I've come up with, but it need not apply strictly, right? So the following is sort of a rough guide to prioritize the Lagna. First priority is given to the basic ascendant or the rising sign, which, as I said, is calculated by your exact time of birth, and it changes every couple of hours. Then, of course, comes the moon sign. This is a good bet if you don't know the exact time of birth for both the dashas and the transits. It works quite well. And thirdly, the sun sign. Some would say that depending on what you're calculating in the chart, the Arudha Lagna is perhaps the second most important after the basic ascendant. A reason being that Arudha is basically the manifestation of Maya, or how the outwardly world perceives us and the events around us. And then you have to see the Garakamsha Lagna, which I think is very important. So this is the sign where the Atmakaraka planet is placed in your chart. The Atmakaraka planet, again, is the planet with the highest degrees in your chart. And you put that on top and you treat that sign as the Lagna in the D1. Yeah. And then you would read the chart from there. And I think this is a really good focal point if you're doubtful about the time of your birth. I've seen this give very good results. Even more so, it's a good bet when you're going through the dasha of the planets that are situated with the Atmakaraka or the Atmakaraka itself. If you're experiencing the dasha of the Atmakaraka itself, this is a good one. Then also check the what's called the Paka Lagna. This is the sign where the Lagna Lord is placed. So, for example, you're a Leo Lagna, but the sun goes into Taurus, and then Taurus becomes the Paka Lagna. Then this one is quite important, and the one that I'm about to speak about is quite important, and it's often used in Jaimini calculations. This is called the Jeev Lagna. Jeev or Jiva meaning life or life force. And basically this is a sign where Jupiter is, especially for males, and Venus for females. Frankly speaking, I just stick to Jupiter for both male and female, and read the chart from there. It's actually quite an important one in most Nadi Jyotish schools, and depending on what we're calculating, I would place priority on this one after the moon lagna. For instance, if you're calculating lifespan or if you're calculating longevity. And as I said, my inclination actually is to take Jupiter for both male and female, because Jupiter is the Jeev Garaka anyway. Concept of this Jiva can also be used when you're examining results of a planetary transit. Yeah, works pretty well. For instance, you're in Mercury Dasha, and Mercury is sitting in Gemini. But that Mercury is in Mrigashira. So that's connecting that Mercury, although it's sitting in Gemini in its own sign, but because it's sitting in Mrigashira, it's connecting to Mars, being that the controlling planet of Mrigashira is Mars. So here we see that the Jiva is the consciousness of the planet, right? And how do we see that? Well, we see where the nakshatra of the planet, where it's situated, and who's ruling that nakshatra. So here we see that the Jiva is a consciousness of Mercury, but it's connecting to Mars. So Mars becomes the consciousness of that Mercury, if it makes sense. So if the characteristics of the Mars in this example are not in tune with the planet, which is Mercury in this example, or they're of a contradictory nature, like in this case, we know that they're of a contradictory nature, Mars and Mercury don't mix, then what happens, the planet's consciousness and activity will clash. Activity is the sign, which is Gemini, but the consciousness is the nakshatra, which is Mrigashira. And that's at a clash here. And then the planet may not be able to give the results that you may think in a natural way in its dasha period. Yeah. So if you're taking Jupiter's placement as the new lagna, the pulse or the consciousness, then see how it is connecting with the other planets in your chart, right? And then finally, of course, we have the dasha lagna, which is just treating the Mahadasha that you're going through. It could be Rahu, Saturn, whatever the major planetary period dasha you're going through. Treat that as the lagna. And I'm talking about Vimshottari dasha here, right? Vimshottari dasha period. And frankly, any sign where there's 3 or more planets can also be taken as a lagna, because it becomes a high energy place in the chart. Now, the goal eventually is to see patterns that repeat from multiple lagnas. The more the repetition, the more the guarantee that the deciphered prediction will fructify. You could also look at it from the standpoint of where the yogas are happening, depending on which perspective you're taking, which lagna you're putting on top, and how are the yogas manifesting from there. That can be a clue as to which one is working the best. Of course, always keep in mind the basic rule that even though many of the lagnas can strongly modify or alter the effects of the planets, nothing can completely change the basic D1 lagna chart, right, your ascendant chart, which tends to be the foundation of the chart. But I always suggest using a combination of these and then seeing what patterns are repeating. And I think sometimes, for example, you're not seeing any results from the Lagna, but when you use the Atmakarka as the focal point, you're getting more results. Perhaps because the sign where the Atmakarka is, there's maybe 2 or 3 other planets there. Or maybe the Atmakarka is a Lagna Lord itself. Or the sign where the Atmakarka is, there's also the moon sitting there, like, right? So there's various things happening to make that a stronger focal point. And another way you can see it is when the eclipses are hitting that axis where you have many planets. Then probably you will see life events manifesting, changes manifesting very quickly in your life. Yeah. So that's all for now. Cheers.